My wife taught me two critical lessons about business. First, always protect your assets. And second, never underestimate your partner's greed. She tried to teach me a third lesson by faking her own death to steal everything I'd built. Instead, I taught her a final lesson about consequences. This is the story of how I orchestrated the most elaborate revenge imaginable. If you believe that betrayal on this level deserves a fitting punishment, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. The scent of a perfectly grilled steak is one of life's simple, undeniable pleasures. That evening, the rich aroma of a dry-aged ribeye mingled with the crisp, pine-scented air rolling in off Lake Washington. It was a signature scent of our summers, filling the open spaces of our modern, glass-walled house, a home I had built from the ground up, much like my company, Sterling Corp. From our sprawling cedar deck, the Seattle skyline glittered across the water, a scattered handful of diamonds against the velvet of twilight. This was my kingdom, the life I'd earned, not inherited. My daughter, Lily, who was 10 going on 30, was giggling uncontrollably. She was trying to get our golden retriever, Buddy, to balance a single, perfectly grilled asparagus spear on his nose. He was, as usual, failing with magnificent enthusiasm, his tail thumping a frantic rhythm against the deckboards every time the vegetable tumbled to the ground. Across the table, my wife, Elena, watched the scene with an amused smile. She held a glass of full-bodied Cabernet, swirling the deep red liquid so it caught the last rays of the dying sun. She was beautiful, effortlessly elegant, the kind of woman who made heads turn without ever trying. She was the perfect partner, the perfect mother, the cornerstone of my perfect world. He's never going to get it, sweetie, she said, her voice a warm, melodic counterpoint to the first crickets beginning their nightly chorus. His center of gravity is all off. He almost got it that time, Mom Lily insisted, her face a mask of pure, childish concentration as she carefully repositioned the asparagus on the dog's snout. I took a slow sip of my own wine, the complex notes of cherry and oak filling my senses. I let the moment sink in, anchoring it in my memory. These were the moments that mattered, not the multi-million-dollar deals, the hostile takeovers, or the fawning profiles in business magazines. This, right here, the quiet, uncomplicated happiness of my family. I had everything a man could ever want. Then, her phone buzzed on the polished teak table, a soft, intrusive vibration that seemed to cut through the peaceful evening air. Elena glanced at the screen. It was a fractional movement, but I saw the subtle shift in her posture, a microscopic tightening around her eyes that I was probably the only person on earth who could notice. She gave me a quick, almost apologetic smile, the kind she reserved for minor work interruptions. "It's Damian," she said, already pushing her chair back with a smooth, practiced motion, probably having a meltdown about the quarterly reports. "You know how he gets. I'll just be a second." Damian Vance, my business partner, my best friend since our dorm rooms at Stanford. He was the charismatic, silver-tongued salesman to my quiet, methodical strategist. We were a perfect team, the yin and yang that had built Sterling Corp from a garage startup into a tech giant. "Tell him to take a breath," I said, cutting into my steak. The knife slid through the tender meat with a satisfying whisper. "The numbers are rock solid. He needs to enjoy his weekend." She didn't answer. already walking to the far end of the deck, putting distance between us. She turned her back, her slender silhouette framed against the deep purple and orange of the sunset. Her voice was a low murmur, the words stolen by the breeze. I watched her for a moment. The way she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear, the slight, familiar tilt of her head as she listened. It was a common sight, the late-night work calls, the weekend emergencies. It was the price of running an empire. Still, a small, irrational flicker of annoyance sparked inside me. Tonight was supposed to be for us. Lily had finally given up on Buddy's balancing act and was now trying to teach him how to high-five, her commands dissolving into fits of laughter. I turned my attention to her, to the pure, uncomplicated joy on her face, and consciously pushed the annoyance away. I had no reason to feel it. I trusted my wife. I trusted my best friend. That trust was the bedrock of my entire world. When Elena returned to the table a few minutes later, her smile was bright again. But it felt manufactured. It didn't quite reach her eyes, which seemed distant, focused on something far beyond the Seattle skyline. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Oh, you know Damian," she said with a little laugh, waving a dismissive hand as she sat down. "He was stressing about the font choice on the final presentation slides for the board meeting. Can you believe it? The font?" She rolled her eyes playfully. I told him to get a grip. It was such a plausible, trivial detail that I accepted it without a second thought. I chuckled. That sounds like him. The moment passed. The conversation shifted back to Lily's upcoming science fair project. We finished dinner, cleared the plates, and moved inside. Later, after we'd tucked Lily into bed, after I'd read a chapter of her fantasy novel, and Elena had kissed her forehead and smoothed her hair, we settled onto the large, cream-colored couch in the living room. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, our only illumination. We sat in a comfortable silence, a familiar routine. At least, I thought it was comfortable. Looking back now, that silence feels different. It wasn't the silence of shared peace. It was the silence of a void. Of us. Empty space between us filled with everything that was left unsaid. I was woken from a deep sleep by a sound that didn't belong. A heavy, persistent knocking. Not at the bedroom door, but downstairs, at the massive, solid oak front door. I glanced at the illuminated clock on my nightstand. 2:17 a.m. A cold dread, thick and immediate, washed over me, pulling me from the depths of sleep. My first thought was for Lily. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb the lump under the covers beside me. I could just make out the form, the gentle rise and fall of breathing. Elena. Safe. Downstairs. The knocking came again. Louder this time. More urgent. It wasn't the sound of a lost neighbor. It was the sound of authority. I pulled on a silk robe, my heart starting to pound a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I padded down the floating staircase, each step seeming to echo in the cavernous silence of the house. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the front door, I could see flashing lights, red and blue. They pulsed without a sound, painting the white marble of the entryway in ghastly, alternating colors. My mind raced. A mistake. A security alarm malfunction. Wrong house. I took a deep, steadying breath and pulled the heavy door open. 2 police officers stood on my porch. They were young, their faces etched with a grim professionalism that did nothing to soften the harshness of their presence. The cold night air swirled around my ankles, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and car exhaust. Roscoe Christian, the taller of the two, asked. His badge glinted under the porch light. "Yes. What's going on? Is everything all right?" He cleared his throat, his eyes holding a practiced sort of pity that made my stomach clench. "Sir, I'm very sorry to have to tell you this. There's been an accident. A car accident on the I-90, heading east. About an hour ago." The world seemed to slow down. My blood ran cold. An accident. A vehicle matching your wife's, a white Range Rover, went off the road near the Mercer Island Bridge. There was a fire. I'm so sorry. Sir. He paused, letting the weight of the unspoken words settle. There were no survivors. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds, abstract and meaningless, hanging in the cold night air. My brain tried to assemble them into something coherent. But it failed. A fire. No survivors. He was talking about Elena. But that was ridiculous. A strange, hollow laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound of pure disbelief. And it surprised even me. The officers exchanged a worried glance. "Sir," the shorter one began, taking a half-step forward. "No," I said, shaking my head, the laugh dying in my throat. "No. You've made a mistake. A serious mistake. That's completely impossible." We found her driver's license in a purse recovered from the scene. Sire, the vehicle registration is in her name. "I don't care what you found," I interrupted, my voice firmer now, laced with an indignant certainty. "It's impossible, because my wife is upstairs. She's in our bed, sleeping. Right now." A flicker of genuine confusion crossed their faces. This was clearly not a reaction they were trained for. Without waiting for a response, I turned and started back towards the stairs. "Come on. I'll show you. Then you can go find whoever was really in that crash." I could hear their heavy boots following me, the sound clumsy and loud in my quiet home. I felt a surge of triumphant relief. They would see. This would all be cleared up, and I could go back to sleep next to my wife. Horrible. Ridiculous mistake. I pushed open our bedroom door, leaving it wide for them to see. The room was dark, save for the ambient glow of the city filtering through the windows. "Elena," I said softly, confidently. Silence. My hand found the switch for the lamp on my nightstand. I flicked it on. Soft, warm light flooded the room, and my heart stopped. The sheets on her side of the bed were thrown back, rumpled. The pillows were askew. The indentation of her head was still clearly visible on her pillow. But the bed was empty. She was right here. I stammered, my voice failing me. I turned to the officers, my face a canvas of disbelief. My triumphant certainty crumbled into dust. My eyes darted around the room, frantic, searching for an explanation. And then I saw it. The glass door to our private balcony, the one overlooking the lake. It was usually locked at night. A habit of hers. Tonight, it was ajar. A gap of about 6 inches. A cool breeze rustled the sheer curtains. She had slipped out. But why? Where would she go at 2 a.m? The phone call. Damian. The lie about the font. The distant look in her eyes. It all came rushing back. A tidal wave of disconnected facts that suddenly felt terrifyingly connected. The officers were quiet, their faces now filled with the pity I'd seen earlier. They were letting me process the impossible. They had seen this before. Shock. Denial. The slow, agonizing dawn of a terrible reality. The world tilted on its axis. My wife was gone from our bed, and 2 police officers were telling me she was dead. Both things couldn't be true, but standing in my empty bedroom, I was horribly afraid that somehow they both were. The next few hours were a methodical, procedural nightmare that dragged me further and further into a waking dream. It culminated in a trip to the King County Medical Examiner's office. The drive there was silent, my mind a churning vortex of grief, confusion, and a new, terrifying feeling that was beginning to curdle in my gut suspicion. I walked down a long, sterile hallway that smelled sharply of bleach and something else, something cloyingly sweet that turned my stomach. The coroner was a kind, tired-looking man in his late 50s named Dr. Alistair Reed. He spoke in gentleness, measured tones, as if he were handling a fragile piece of glass. He led me into a cold, brightly lit room with walls of stainless steel drawers. He pulled one out. The screech of metal on metal was the only sound. He unzipped the black body bag. I braced myself, but nothing can prepare you for that moment. The body was badly burned. The face, it was unrecognizable. A grotesque mask of tragedy. But the height was right. The general build was right. Doctor. Reed pointed with a gloved finger to the remnants of clothing. What was left of them? It was the designer dress Elena had worn to a charity gala last week. Her purse, partially melted but still identifiable, lay on a nearby steel tray alongside a blackened phone. My mind was screaming. It was a hurricane. It was her. It couldn't be her. I managed a numb nod. Yes, I whispered, my throat tight and raw. That's my wife. That's Elena. The coroner gave me a sympathetic look and began to zip the bag closed. But as he did, my eyes caught something on the body's left wrist. A small patch of skin that had somehow been protected from the worst of the flames. A small, dark shape. A tattoo. A tiny, intricate infinity symbol. And I knew with a bolt of absolute, ice-cold certainty that chilled me to the very marrow of my bones. That was not my wife. Elena didn't have any tattoos. She hated needles. She was terrified of them. We'd had a laughing argument about it years ago on vacation in Hawaii when I'd suggested we get matching ones. She'd turned pale and said she wouldn't even get her ears pierced again, let alone let a needle full of ink touch her skin. A wave of vertigo hit me so hard I had to grab the edge of the steel table to keep from collapsing. The world went silent. The coroner's gentle voice fading into a dull, distant roar. In that silent, roaring vacuum, everything snapped into a horrifying blank. Crystal clear focus. The late-night call. The lie about the font. The empty bed. The open balcony door. A body in the morgue that looked like her, was dressed like her, but wasn't her. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a performance, a meticulously staged production, and I was the intended audience. I forced myself to breathe. In. Out. My lungs burned. I straightened up, consciously arranging my facial muscles into a mask of shattered grief. I had to play my part. If I let on, that I knew. If I showed even a flicker of suspicion, the entire production would collapse, and the actors would scatter before I could discover the plot. I need a moment. I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Doctor. Reed nodded with practiced understanding. Of course. Take all the time you need. He quietly exited the room, leaving me alone with the stranger who was wearing my wife's life like a costume. I stared at the black body bag, but I wasn't seeing it. I was seeing the lies, the months, maybe years, of deception that had led to this cold, sterile room. They had made a mistake, a small one, a tiny, insignificant detail they thought no one would ever see, or would be too blinded by grief to notice. But they had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was, what I was capable of. As I stood there in the cold, silent room, the grief I was supposed to be feeling, the grief I was performing, was completely incinerated by a cold, white-hot rage. My perfect life hadn't just been destroyed. It had been a lie, an elaborate illusion. And the two people I loved and trusted most in the world were the magicians who had orchestrated the trick. I walked out of that morgue a different man. The loving husband was dead, his ashes scattered in that cold room. The trusting friend was gone. All that was left was the CEO, the strategist, the man who built an empire from nothing. And as I stepped out into the gray, pre-dawn light of Seattle, the rage wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, crystalline, a diamond-hard certainty at the center of my being. A single question echoed in the silent, empty spaces of my mind. A question that would now become the entire focus of my existence. It's not her. So, where the hell is she? The drive home from the medical examiner's office was a journey through a city I no longer recognized. The familiar steel and glass towers of Seattle seemed alien. The gray, overcast sky pressing down with a suffocating weight. The world outside my car was muted. The colors leached out, as if I were watching it all on a faded film reel. Inside, however, my mind was a forge. The cold fury I discovered in that sterile room burning away every last vestige of the man I had been just hours before. The grief was a phantom limb. I knew it should be there. An agonizing ache. But all I could feel was the sharp, crystalline focus of my rage. I parked the car in the garage, the silence of the engine's death echoing the profound emptiness of the house. I walked through the door into the grand entryway. The polished marble floor cool beneath my feet. This home, once a symbol of my success and a sanctuary for my family, now felt like a crime scene. Every object held a memory, and every memory was now tainted, part of an elaborate, cruel deception. Elena's favorite painting in the hallway, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. The way the morning light hit the spot on the couch where she drank her coffee, it was all part of the set, dressing for the play she had written. A play in which I was the fool. My first act as this new man, this hollowed-out strategist, was not to break down. It was to pick up the phone. I bypassed my contacts and manually dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before he picked up. "Frank," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos churning within me. "Roscoe, my God. I just heard. I was about to call. I'm so sorry. I'm on my way over." His voice was thick with genuine sympathy, a stark contrast to the lies I'd been living with. Frank, my younger brother, the black sheep who'd traded a law degree for a PI license, was the only person on earth I knew I could trust without reservation. "Don't come here yet," I said, cutting him off. "I need you to work. I'm hiring you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Hiring me, Roscoe? What are you talking about? This is a time for family." "Not for. This is family," I said, my voice dropping lower. Frank, I was at the morgue. They showed me the body. I paused, letting the weight of that statement hang in the air. Something is wrong. It's all wrong. I need you to look into something for me. Quietly. Off the books. No one can know. You understand, especially not the police. I could hear the shift in his tone. The concern morphing into the sharp focus of a professional. What am I looking for? I didn't tell him about the tattoo. That was my ace. My private, undeniable truth. To reveal it would be to show my hand. I want you to look into Damian.com. I said, and his connection to Elena, everything. Financials, travel, communications. I want to know who he's been talking to, where he's been going, where every single dollar has moved for the past 2 years. I need a ghost. Frank, I need you to find things that don't want to be found. Damian Frank's voice was laced with disbelief. Roscoe. He's your best friend. He's family. That's what I thought. I said, and the coldness in my own voice startled me. Just do it. Whatever it costs. And Frank, act like a grieving brother when you talk to people. This is just you. Helping your big brother find closure. That's the story. He was silent for a long moment. I could picture him, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair, processing the implications. All right, Roscoe, he said finally, his voice now, all business. I'm on it. I hung up the phone. The first move had been made. Now came the hardest part of the game, the performance. I walked up the stairs. Each step a monumental effort. Lily's door was closed. I had to tell her. I had to break her heart to protect her from a truth that would shatter her world. This, more than anything, was their unforgivable sin. They hadn't just tried to destroy me. They were willing to sacrifice our daughter's soul as collateral damage. I sat on the edge of her bed. She was still asleep. Her face peaceful, innocent of the wreckage of our lives. I watched her for a long time, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyelashes rested against her skin. I was drawing strength from her, fueling the fire of my resolve. When she finally stirred, her eyes fluttering open, I arranged my face into a mask of unbearable sorrow. Hey, sweetie, I whispered, my voice cracking on cue. She smiled, a sleepy, beautiful smile. Morning, Daddy. Then her eyes focused on my face, and the smile faded. What's wrong? You're crying. I hadn't even realized. A single tear, à très tôt, had escaped and was tracing a path down my cheek. It was a genuine tear, but not for the reason she thought. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated rage. Ik knelt beside her bed, taking her small hands in mine, and I told her the story. The official story, the lie that I would have to maintain for years. I told her that Mommy had been in a terrible accident, that she had gone to heaven, that she loved her more than anything in the world. Watching her face crumple, hearing the heart-wrenching sob that tore from her small body, was the most painful thing I have ever endured. She threw her arms around my neck and wept, and I held her, my own body rigid with the effort of playing the grieving father while my mind was a cold, calculating machine, already plotting the downfall of the people responsible for her tears. Every sob was another nail in their coffins. Later that morning, Damian arrived. I saw his car pull up through the living room window. He got out, dressed in a somber, expensive suit. his face a perfect picture of grief. He walked to the door and didn't even ring the bell. Just let himself in. As he had 1,000 times before. The best friend. The uncle to my child. "Roscoe," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he strode across the room. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug. I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. A masterful performance. As I stood there, locked in his embrace, smelling the faint, familiar scent of his cologne, I felt nothing but a profound, chilling revulsion. It was like being held by a snake. I forced myself to return the hug, to clap him on the back, to play my part. "I can't believe it," he said, pulling back. To his eyes, his lying eyes glistening with unshed tears. I talked to her last night. About the quarterly reports. She sounded fine. The lie was so brazen, so effortless. He was testing me, seeing if I remembered. She told me. I mumbled, looking down at the floor. "She said you were worried about the presentation font." Relief flickered across his face, so faint that anyone else would have missed it. But I saw it. He believed I was completely in the dark. He believed I was a broken man. Perfect. We spent the next hour sitting in my living room, the one he and Elena had probably plotted in, drinking the expensive whiskey I paid for. He talked about her, sharing memories, his voice catching at all the right moments. I let him talk, nodding, offering monosyllabic responses, letting my silence be mistaken for shock. All the while, I was observing, cataloging, the way he never quite met my eyes for more than a few seconds. The way he kept checking his phone, feigning apologies that he had to manage the crisis at the office. He was managing more than a crisis. He was managing a heist. The days that followed were a surreal parade of condolences and casseroles, friends, neighbors, and business associates came and went, offering empty platitudes. I moved through it all like a ghost, my performance as the grieving widower becoming more refined with each passing hour. A week after the accident, Frank delivered the first package. He didn't mail it. He didn't email it. He came to the house late one night, dressed as a pizza delivery guy, and handed me a plain manila envelope along with a lukewarm pepperoni pizza. "Don't let anyone see this," he whispered, his eyes dark with a worry that went beyond brotherly concern. Inside, I locked myself in my home office. I spread the contents of the envelope across my large mahogany desk. Photos. Photos of Elena and Damian. Not at business meetings, at a boutique hotel in the wine country north of the city. Photos of them kissing, their faces alight with a passion I hadn't seen from my wife in years. Photos of them laughing over a candlelit dinner. The dates on the photos stretched back 18 months. Hotel receipts. Paid in cash. Copies of emails. Sent from a private, encrypted account. Full of stolen moments and shared dreams of a future together. A future without me. I stared at the images, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The suspicion was gone, replaced by the hard, jagged certainty of betrayal. Seeing it in black and white was different. It made the abstract horror tangible. My best friend. My wife. This wasn't a recent lapse in judgment. This was a long-term, calculated campaign of deceit. The foundation of my life wasn't just cracked. It had been built on quicksand from the start. I didn't get angry. The rage had already burned itself into something colder, harder. This was just data, evidence, ammunition. The next day, I forced myself to go into the office for a few hours. It was part of the charade. The stoic CEO, trying to find solace in his work. People tiptoed around me, their faces etched with pity. It was nauseating. As I was walking towards my office, I saw Arthur Finch, our CFO, coming down the hall. Arthur was a man who lived by the numbers, meticulous, precise, and constitutionally incapable of handling chaos. He saw me, and his face went pale. He abruptly turned as if to head in a different direction. But it was too late. "Arthur," I said, my voice calm. He froze, then slowly turned back. A deer in the headlights. "Roscoe," he stammered, wringing his hands. "My deepest condolences. It's a tragedy. Unthinkable." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, studying his face. His forehead was beaded with sweat. Despite the office being cool, his eyes darted everywhere but at me. "I just wanted to say thank you for holding things together here. I know it can't be easy." Of course, he said quickly, taking a step back. "Anything for the company. If you'll excuse me, I have a conference call." He practically fled down the hallway. I watched him go, a new piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Arthur was a terrible liar. He was involved. Maybe not a willing participant, but he knew something. He was a weak link. I filed the observation away, a vulnerability to be exploited later. The final piece of the puzzle arrived 2 days later. Another late-night visit from Frank. This time, there was no pretense of pizza. His face was grim. He handed me a slim laptop. "Don't look at this on any network connected to your house or the office," he said. "It's firewalled 6 ways from Sunday." "What's on here, Roscoe?" "It's worse than you think." That night, with Lily safely asleep, I sat in the dark of my office and opened the laptop. Frank had performed digital archaeology. He had recovered deleted files, traced encrypted transactions, and pieced together a conspiracy so vast and venomous it took my breath away. It was all there, a shadow network of shell corporations, registered in offshore havens, a systematic siphoning of Sterling Corp funds disguised as vendor payments and consulting fees, rerouted through these corporations for over a year. And the centerpiece of their plan, the life insurance policy, my wife's policy, which I had set up years ago, had been recently and quietly amended. The payout was a staggering $25 million, and a new clause had been added, and a Brenhind and a Bidend, naming Damian Vance as the secondary executor of her estate. Should the primary beneficiary me be deemed unfit or unable to manage the funds, they were going to paint me as an unstable, grieving husband, have me declared incompetent, and he would have gained control of everything. The final click of the mouse revealed their exit strategy: a fully funded, non-extradition account in the Cayman Islands, waiting for the final wire transfer of the insurance payout. They weren't just planning to run away together, they were planning to bleed me dry, destroy my reputation, and erase me from the empire I had built. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the utter devastation of my life. The rage was gone now. The coldness was gone. All that was left was a profound, terrifying clarity. They hadn't just cheated on me. They hadn't just tried to steal from me. They had tried to unwrite my entire existence. I stood up and walked over to the large whiteboard on the far wall, the one I used for mapping out corporate strategies and product launches. I erased a diagram for a new software patent. I picked up a black marker. The cap made a sharp click in the silent room. At the top of the board, I wrote, "The funeral." They wanted Elena dead. They wanted my money. They wanted my life. Fine. I would give them exactly what they wanted, but it would be on my terms. The grief, the shock, the pain, it all coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of purpose. I was no longer the victim in their play. I was the new director, and I was about to rewrite the final act. I began to sketch out the plan, my marker flying across the white surface. Boxes and arrows, timelines, contingencies, a new list of characters, the asset Elena, the target Damian, the leverage Arthur. It was a business plan. The most important acquisition of my life, the acquisition of justice. As I was drawing a final arrow, connecting Damian's name to a box labeled Federal Prison, my secure burner phone, the one Frank had given me, buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. It was Frank. "Roscoe," he said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "A pure, urgent signal. We have a problem. They're accelerating. Damian just put in a formal request with the insurance company to expedite the payout, citing unusual circumstances. And he's been pressuring Arthur Finch to prepare a massive wire transfer disguised as a capital investment. He's not going to wait. He's trying to get the money and run. We have to move. Now." I looked at my half-finished diagram on the whiteboard. The theoretical timeline. The careful preparations. All of it just evaporated. The storm wasn't on the horizon anymore. It was here. Frank's voice on the burner phone was a blade, slicing through the theoretical calm of my office and plunging me into the cold reality of an accelerated timeline. We have to move. Now. The words hung in the air long after I ended the call. I looked at the whiteboard, at my elegant, methodical diagram of revenge. It was a beautiful plan, designed to unfold with the precision of a chess match. But my opponent had just knocked over the board and demanded we play speed chess. There was no room for panic. Panic was a luxury for men with nothing to lose. I had everything to lose. And her name was Lily. I took a single, deep breath. The air tasting of stale coffee and the electric hum of the computer. The strategist in my head didn't shut down. It overclocked. All the timelines compressed. The contingency plans became primary options. And the entire, complex machinery of my counteroffensive roared to life. The storm wasn't coming. I was the storm. The next morning, I initiated the first phase. The performance had to be flawless, grounded in a believable emotional truth. I found Lily in the kitchen, meticulously arranging blueberries on her pancakes to form a smiley face. I kissed the top of her head, my heart clenching with a love so fierce it almost buckled my knees. The lie I was about to tell was for her, a shield I was forging to protect her from the shrapnel of her parents' war. I made coffee, my movements deliberately slow. Weary, I sat down at the breakfast nook, rubbing my temples as if fighting off a migraine. "Daddy, are you okay?" Lily asked, her young voice laced with a concern that was far too adult. "I'm just tired, sweetie," I said, my voice a rough whisper. "Just very tired." This was the bait, not for Lily, but for the unseen audience I knew I had. Frank had confirmed it: my home, my car, my office, they were all bugged. Elena and Damian were listening, watching my every move, waiting for me to crumble, so I would give them a performance worthy of their attention. That evening, I set the main stage. The pretense was an emergency business trip. I called my pilot and had him file a flight plan to a private airstrip near our remote cabin in the Cascade Mountains, a place with notoriously bad cell service. I packed a bag in full view of the main security cameras in our bedroom, moving with the heavy, sluggish gait of a man defeated by grief. I let my shoulders slump. I sighed audibly. I was a portrait of a broken man seeking solitude. Then came the centerpiece of the act, the conversation that would seal Elena's fate. I called her burner phone, the one Frank had identified. "It's me," I said, my voice thick. "Roscoe, is everything all right?" Her voice was a perfect blend of surprise and wifely concern, a virtuoso of deceit. "No," I said, letting my voice crack. I can't be in this house anymore. Not right now. Every corner. I see her. I'm going up to the cabin for a few days. To think. To just be alone." There was a pause on her end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. The silent, triumphant exchange of glances between her and Damian. It was too perfect. The grieving husband was removing himself from the board, leaving the path to the corporate treasury wide open. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I think that's a good idea. You need that. Take all the time you need. Don't worry about anything here. Damian and I will handle the office. Just take care of yourself." "Okay. Okay," I whispered, and hung up. The trap was set. They believed I was 100 miles away, lost in the woods and my own sorrow. That night, after putting a very worried Lily to bed with promises I'd call as soon as I landed, I didn't go to the airport. I went to the guest house at the edge of our property and waited. The real performance was about to begin. I watched the main house on a secure tablet linked to a hidden, secondary set of cameras Frank and I had installed weeks ago. At 1:45 p.m., Elena came into the kitchen. She was dressed for a casual evening in .coms, but there was a palpable energy about her, a lightness in her step. The grieving widow was gone, replaced by a woman on the verge of a great victory. She poured herself a glass of wine, the expensive Chateau Margaux from my collection. A finale. Petty insult. She took a sip, swirled the glass, and stared out the window towards the glittering city. She was toasting her success, her freedom, her new life. My part in this scene was simple, clinical. The wine cellar, like the rest of the house, had a state-of-the-art climate control and atmospheric regulation system, a system I had designed. From the guest house, I typed a single command into my laptop. It was a failsafe I had built in years ago, a protocol to flood the cellar with inert argon gas in case of a fire, displacing all oxygen and preserving the wine. I had rerouted a single, invisible vent from that system to terminate directly behind the wine rack in the kitchen. I didn't flood the room. I simply released a small, controlled, colorless, odorless cloud of a powerful, fast-acting sedative in aerosol form. She wouldn't have noticed a thing. I watched on the camera as she took another sip of wine, her brow furrowed slightly. She blinked. A little slowly, she raised a hand to her temple. As if suddenly feeling tired, she set the wine glass down on the counter with a soft clink. Then, her knees buckled. She didn't fall. She simply slumped, folding onto the cold tile floor in a silent, boneless heap. The house went still. Frank was already waiting by the service entrance. We moved with the silent, efficient coordination of a special forces team. We wore gloves, masks, and shoe covers. No trace, no evidence. Seeing her there, unconscious on the floor, didn't stir any emotion in me. There was no pity, no lingering affection. I was looking at an asset, a problem to be managed. Frank and I lifted her. She was dead weight, her head lolling against my shoulder. The faint scent of her perfume, the one I had bought her in Paris, was a ghostly reminder of the woman I thought she was. We carried her down a hidden flight of stairs behind a false wall in the pantry stairs that didn't exist on any of the official blueprints for the house. They led to the room. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a luxury panic room I had secretly commissioned during the last renovation. A place designed to withstand a siege. It was soundproof, with its own ventilation, power, and plumbing. It was furnished with a comfortable bed, a small living area, a fully stocked kitchenette, and a bathroom. It had no windows. The only door was a seamless panel of reinforced steel, controlled electronically from my secure network. And on one wall, dominating the space, was a massive 85-inch television screen, her new window to the world. We placed her on the bed, and Frank, a certified medic from his army days, checked her vitals and administered a counter-agent that would allow her to wake up naturally in a few hours, with no memory of the last few minutes. While he worked, I went back upstairs. The second member of my team was waiting. Chloe Pierce was a struggling actress. Frank had found she had Elena's exact height and build place, and with the right wig and styling, was a convincing double from a distance. She was a professional, her face calm and detached. She was being paid more for this one night's work than she usually made in a year. I handed her a small vial. It's a mild coagulant. It'll make the blood from the cuts look more realistic under the coroner's lights, I said, my voice purely instructional. She just nodded, her eyes focused. I gave her the clothes, an identical copy of the designer dress Elena was wearing. I watched as she put them on. Then, I took the heavy diamond wedding ring from my own finger, the one that matched the band Elena had worn. Her ring was probably destroyed, I said, handing it to Chloe. But just in case, this is for the personal effects bag. Chloe slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. The sight of my ring on this stranger's hand was profoundly unsettling. The final, surreal act in this theater of the absurd debut. Frank emerged from the pantry. Phase 1 is complete. She's secure. He and Chloe left through the service entrance. Their job was to drive an identical white Range Rover to the predetermined spot on a deserted stretch of road near the pass. Frank would stage the scene, the skid marks, the broken guardrail, the deployment of the airbags. Chloe would apply the theatrical makeup and blood, position herself in the driver's seat, and wait for Frank's signal before starting the fire with a remote device. It was a grim, but necessary, piece of choreography. I stayed behind. I cleaned the kitchen, wiping away any trace of our presence. I placed Elena's wine glass in the dishwasher. By the time I was done, the room looked exactly as it had before she entered it, as if none of it had ever happened. I went back to the hidden basement, to a small control room adjacent to her gilded cage. I watched the camera feed from inside the room. For hours, she was perfectly still. Then, around dry a.m., she stirred. Elena sat up slowly, her hand going to her head. Confusion contorted her features. She looked around the unfamiliar, luxurious room. her eyes wide with a growing sense of dislocation. She got off the bed. Her movements tentative. She ran her hands along the smooth, seamless walls, searching for a doorknob, a light switch, a crack. She found nothing. Her breathing started to quicken. Panic began to set in. And then, the large screen on the wall flickered to life. It wasn't a movie. It was the local news. A live broadcast. A reporter stood on a dark, wet road, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights of police cars and a fire truck. Behind him, the smoldering, twisted wreckage of a white Range Rover was being loaded onto a flatbed truck. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Wife of tech mogul Roscoe Christian perishes in fiery late-night crash." I watched Elena's face. I saw the moment her brain processed the information. I saw the confusion morph into sheer, uncomprehending terror. A hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream that I couldn't hear through the soundproof walls. She stumbled backward, her legs giving out, and she slid down the wall to the floor. She was staring at the screen, at the news of her own death. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't the glorious escape she had envisioned. This was a nightmare. Then, I initiated the next part of the performance. I switched the feed on her screen. Now, she was watching a live feed from the security camera in our living room. On the screen, she saw me. I had just arrived home, having supposedly received the terrible news from the police. I walked into the room, my face a mask of devastation. I leaned heavily against the wall, my shoulders shaking. I ran a hand violently through my hair. Then, I let out a single, guttural cry of anguish and slammed my fist onto the marble fireplace mantel. It was a raw, primal display of grief. A performance so convincing that for a second, it almost felt real, even to me. In her prison, Elena watched, her face pale with horror. She was watching the man she had betrayed mourn her death, a death she had planned for him to discover. The hunter had not just become the hunted, she had become the ghost at her own funeral. The following days were a carefully managed assault on two fronts. While I continued my public performance of a grieving widower, accepting condolences and making funeral arrangements, Frank and I launched the attack on Damian. We couldn't use the police. The evidence I had was illegally obtained. So, we created our own arm of the law. Frank hired another actor, a man in his late 50s with a stern, authoritative presence and a past career playing detectives on television. We dressed him in a conservative suit, gave him a fake badge and a briefcase full of meticulously forged documents, bank statements, surveillance photos, and legal-looking papers stamped with the FBI seal. We called him Agent Miller. Agent Miller's target was Arthur Finch, our CFO. Miller intercepted Arthur in the parking garage of our corporate headquarters. I watched it all from a remote camera Frank had planted in a sprinkler head. Arthur was already a nervous wreck, and the sight of a man flashing an FBI badge nearly gave him a heart attack. "Mr. Finch," Miller said, his voice calm and menacing, "we need to talk about Damian Vance and your involvement in a multinational money laundering scheme." He opened the briefcase, giving Arthur a glimpse of the evidence. Arthur's face went from pale to ashen. He was a numbers man, not a criminal. He was in over his head and terrified. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Don't you?" Miller said smoothly, closing the briefcase. "We have wire transfers, offshore accounts, recordings. Mr. Vance is going away for a very long time. The only question is whether you're going with him as a co-conspirator, or if you're going to be our star witness. It took less than 5 minutes. Arthur folded completely, promising his full cooperation. He was now our puppet. And Damian was pulling his strings, completely unaware that we were the ones who had written the script. But Damian was smart, and arrogant people are often suspicious. He needed to be sure I was still the broken, grieving fool. The final test came 2 days before the funeral. He came over to the house, bringing a bottle of my favorite scotch. We sat in my office, the room heavy with a shared, fraudulent grief. He poured 2 glasses. "I was just thinking about her," he said, his voice soft. "Remember that little bistro we all went to in Fremont for her birthday last year? The one with the amazing view, but that absolutely terrible tiramisu. It was a test, a hyper-specific memory. A small detail shared between the 3 of us, a wrong answer, a moment's hesitation, and he would know something was wrong. But he didn't know that I had spent the last 2 weeks listening to Frank's wiretaps. I had heard him and Elena laughing about that very dinner just a month ago." I took a slow sip of scotch, letting the silence stretch. I looked up at him, my eyes empty and distant. "How could I forget?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Elena said it tasted like a wet sponge someone had used to clean the floor." I gave a weak, broken smile. She had a way with words. I saw it again, that same flicker of relief in his eyes. I had passed his test. The last of his suspicions evaporated, replaced by the certainty that he was about to get everything he had ever wanted. The next morning, reassured and confident, Damian made his move. Frank and I were in my hidden control room, watching a different kind of screen. This one showed a complex interface, monitoring international financial transactions. We watched as Damian, using Arthur Finch as his proxy, initiated the wire transfer. It was a massive sum, the culmination of 2 years of theft. He was moving the stolen capital from Sterling Corp's offshore accounts to the final, untraceable account in the Cayman Islands. It was the last step before he would claim the insurance money and disappear. We watched the authentication codes being entered, the security protocols being cleared, the final confirmation screen. Transaction complete. The money was gone. The trap was sprung. He did it. Frank breathed, his voice a mix of awe and disgust. The arrogant bastard actually did it. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my phone and made a call. Not to a fake FBI agent. This time, I called the real one, a contact in the white-collar crime division I'd cultivated for years. "Mark," I said, "it's Roscoe Christian. I have something for you. A gift." At that exact moment, in his gleaming corner office, 30 floors above the city, Damian Vance was likely pouring himself a celebratory drink. He would be smiling, thinking of the beaches, the money, and the life he had stolen. The feed on Elena's screen, which had been showing a looped, somber news report about her memorial service, suddenly switched. It now showed a live feed from a hidden camera in Damian's office. She saw him standing by the window, a triumphant look on his face. Her partner, her lover, her co-conspirator. Then, she saw what he didn't. The door to his office didn't open. It burst inward, splintering off its hinges. The room was instantly flooded with men in dark blue tactical vests, the letters FBI emblazoned in bold yellow across their backs. They moved with a swift, brutal efficiency. Damian spun around, his glass shattering on the floor. his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. Damian Vance, one of the agents, yelled, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." In her silent, luxurious prison, Elena watched it all unfold. She watched as the man she had betrayed me for was slammed against his expensive desk, his hands cuffed violently behind his back. She watched as he was read his rights, his face not defiant, but utterly defeated. He wasn't coming for her. He hadn't escaped. He was caught. And in that moment, watching her lover being dragged away, she finally, truly understood. She hadn't been his partner. She had just been a part of his plan. And now that she had served her purpose, she had been left behind, utterly and completely alone. The feed on Elena's screen went black. For 2 weeks, that was all she had. A blank, silent screen in a silent, luxurious room. 2 weeks is a long time. It's 336 hours. It's over 20,000 minutes. For a person in isolation, with nothing but their own thoughts, it is an eternity. I didn't need to do anything else. The silence, and the memory of Damian's face as the FBI agents dragged him away, was a far more potent form of torture than anything I could have devised. It was the slow, creeping poison of abandonment. The certainty that no one was coming for her, the realization that she was not a partner in a grand scheme, but a disposable pawn in a game she had already lost. During those 2 weeks, the world outside her gilded cage moved on. I finalized the legal maneuvers to reclaim the stolen funds, working with the FBI to trace the complex web of transactions Damian had created. The money was recovered. Sterling Corp was made whole. I attended the memorial service for my dead wife. I stood at a podium in a somber, beautiful chapel filled with flowers and weeping friends, and I delivered a eulogy to the woman I thought I had married. I spoke of her kindness, her laughter, her love for our daughter. Each word was a perfectly crafted lie, a stone I was laying to build the foundation of the new reality. Lily sat in the front row, holding my hand, her small face pale and tear-streaked. It was the hardest performance of my life, and the most necessary. Damian, facing a mountain of undeniable evidence, and the betrayal of his CFO, Arthur Finch, accepted a plea deal. He would cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. His lawyers, in a desperate attempt to mitigate his culpability, began crafting a narrative that painted Elena as the Machiavellian mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. It was a convenient, cowardly lie, and it was the final tool I needed. On the 15th day, I decided it was time. I didn't take the main staircase. I went through the pantry, opening the hidden door and descending the narrow Wunschenzillier. Soundless steps into the heart of my home's secret architecture. The air grew cooler, the silence more profound. I stood outside the seamless steel door of her room and watched her for a moment on the monitor in the control room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank screen. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked diminished. A ghost haunting, a life she had chosen to abandon. All the fire, the ambition, the vibrant energy that had once defined her had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, empty vessel. I keyed in the code. The door slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss. She didn't jump. She didn't scream. She just looked up, her eyes wide and vacant. She watched me as I walked into the room, my footsteps the only sound. I didn't say a word. I simply pulled a sleek, modern chair from the small living area and placed it directly in front of her. about 10 feet away. I sat down, my posture relaxed, my hands resting on my knees. I was not an angry husband. I was not a grieving victim. I was a board chairman calling a final meeting. "Hello, Elena," I said. My voice was calm, even, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice I used in hostile negotiations. She flinched, as if the sound of her own name was a physical blow. She didn't respond. She just stared at me, her mind clearly struggling to process the reality of my presence. "You've had some time to think," I continued, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "Time to reflect on your choices, on your partner." At the mention of Damian, a flicker of something, anger, despair crossed her face. It was the first sign of life I'd seen in her. "He's not," she began, her voice a dry, unused rasp. "He wouldn't." I didn't let her finish the delusion. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. I placed it on the small table between us. "I thought you might say that," I said. "Loyalty is a commendable trait. Misplaced. In your case, but commendable." I pressed a button. Damian's voice filled the silent room. It was a recording of a conversation with his lawyer. A conversation Frank had legally obtained once Damian was in federal custody. "Look." She was the key. Damian's recorded voice said, slick and confident, stripped of all the false emotion he had shown me. Elena wanted out. She felt trapped, underappreciated. The whole fake death thing, that was her idea. A little dramatic for my taste. But she was insistent. I just facilitated the financial side of things. She was the emotional core of the plan. She played Roscoe like a violin. I was just a means to an end for her. You have to make the prosecutor understand that she was the driving force. I watched Elena's face as she listened. I saw every word land like a physical strike. Her back, which had been straight, began to curve, as if her spine were slowly dissolving. Her hands clenched into tight fists in her lap. She was listening to the man she had thrown her life away for 70 these. The man she had betrayed her family for, systematically dismembering her, sacrificing her piece by piece to save himself. When the recording ended with Damian's lawyer agreeing that painting Elena as the primary conspirator was their best legal strategy, a single tear escaped her eye and traced a slow, silent path down her cheek. She didn't make a sound. She just collapsed inward, a building imploding in slow motion. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting the poison of his words do its work. He never once asked his lawyer if you were okay, I said softly, twisting the knife. He never asked where you were. His only concern was how quickly he could pin the entire conspiracy on his dead, and therefore conveniently silent accomplice. You weren't his partner. Elena, you were his leverage, and then you became his alibi. She finally looked at me, her eyes a swirling vortex of shame, rage, and a profound, bottomless despair. "What do you want?" "Roscoe," she whispered, her voice broken. "Why are you doing this?" "What do I want?" I leaned forward slightly. "That's a fair question. I could turn you over to the police, given Damian's testimony. You'd be convicted. You'd spend a decade, maybe more, in a federal prison. Lily would grow up knowing her mother was a common criminal, a thief who tried to destroy her father and then faked her own death. That is one option. We could call it justice." I let that image settle in her mind. The shame of a trial, the headlines, The visiting rooms, the devastating truth that would one day be explained to our daughter. But, I continued, my voice still calm and even, I've come to believe that justice is a far more creative concept than that. So I am going to give you a choice, not a negotiation. A choice. You will choose your own sentence. Right here. Right now. I stood up and began to pace slowly, my hands clasped behind my back. Choice number 1, I said, stopping to look at her. You can die? For real. This time, not in a fiery crash, but quietly. We will say that the grief and the guilt of what you did were too much to bear. Frank will discover a suicide note on your laptop, one that conveniently confesses everything. Exoneratus me, and paints Damian as a manipulative monster who preyed on you. We will find your body in a hotel room. It will be tragic, but it will be final. And here is the important part. Lily will be protected. She will grow up believing her mother was a wonderful, loving person who made a terrible mistake under the influence of a terrible man. Her memory of you, the perfect, loving mother, will remain intact. You will die a martyr to your own myth. I saw her absorb this, the appeal of it, the final, selfless act to protect her daughter's innocence. A clean slate, paid for with her life. Or, I said, turning to face her again, there is choice number 2. You live, but Elena Christian, the woman you were, she stays dead. I have created a new identity for you. Sarah Jenkins, a woman with no past, no family, no assets. She has a social security number, a driver's license, and a one-way bus ticket to a small, quiet town in Montana. Sarah Jenkins will get a job as a waitress or a cashier. She will live in a small, rented apartment. She will be invisible. She will be no one. I walked back and stood directly in front of her, looking down into her shattered eyes. You will never contact me again. You will never contact anyone from your old life again. And most importantly, you will never, ever, under any circumstances, attempt to contact Lily. If you break these rules, if you so much as send an anonymous email, our deal is void. The world will learn that Elena Christian is alive. And the consequences I outlined in choice number 1, the trial, the shame, the truth revealed to our daughter will come to pass. You will live out your days as a ghost, a silent observer of a world that no longer knows you exist. I paused, letting the two stark, terrible options hang in the air between us. But, I added, delivering the final, crucial component of my sentence. If you choose this life, this non-life, once a month, every month, for the rest of your life, I will send you a photograph of Lily. You will get to watch her grow up. You will see her school pictures, her birthday parties, her prom, her graduation. You will see the woman she becomes. You will have a window into the life you threw away. A window you can look through, but never touch. That is the price of your life. She looked up at me, her face a mess of conflicting emotions. It was a perfectly balanced, exquisitely cruel choice. A noble death, or a life of perpetual, silent longing, the martyr, or the ghost. She didn't take long. Her maternal instinct, the one pure, untainted thing left inside her, made the decision. Her own legacy was less important than the ability to see her child's face. I want the pictures, she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her choice. "I'll do it. I want the pictures." I nodded slowly. It was done. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. As I walked out of that room and sealed the door, leaving her to contemplate the beginning of her new, empty life, all I felt was a profound, aching void. The space in my chest that had been occupied by white-hot rage was now just empty. I had won. I had achieved the perfect revenge, but it hadn't fixed what was broken. It hadn't brought back the man I was, or the family I thought I had. It had just ended the story. 6 months later, the world was a different place. Sterling Corp, now free of Damian's parasitic influence, was thriving. Our stock price was at an all-time high. I had successfully consolidated my control, promoting from within, and the company was more innovative and profitable than ever. The business world saw me as a tragic but resilient figure, a titan who had weathered an unspeakable personal tragedy and emerged stronger. At home, the change was even more profound. The oppressive cloud of grief that had hung over our house for months had finally begun to lift. Lily was laughing again. It had started as a small chuckle at one of Buddy's clumsy antics, a sound so unexpected it had made my heart stop. But soon, it became more frequent. She was excelling in school. She had rejoined her soccer team. She was having sleepovers with her friends. The light was returning to her eyes. She still had moments of sadness. Of course, quiet times when she would ask me about her mom, and I would tell her stories, the carefully curated, beautiful lies about the woman who had loved her more than life itself. I was building a fortress of happy memories around her, a fortress that the ugly truth could never breach. One crisp autumn afternoon, in a small, unassuming diner in Bozeman, Montana, a waitress named Sarah Jenkins was wiping down a sticky table. She was thinner than she used to be, her hands calloused, her face devoid of makeup. She moved with a weary efficiency. A customer left a small tip and a discarded newspaper on the table. As she picked it up, she saw my face staring back at her from the cover of a business magazine. The headline read, "The Resurrection of Roscoe Christian, How Seattle's Tragic Titan Rebuilt His Empire." She stared at the picture for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before crumpling the newspaper and tossing it into the trash. Later that day, she checked the post office box she rented under her new name. Inside was a single, plain white envelope with no return address. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was Lily's school picture. She was smiling, a wide, gap-toothed grin, her hair in pigtails, a look of pure, uncomplicated happiness on her face. Sarah Jenkins stood there in the cold, fluorescent light of the post office, clutching the small, glossy photo, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And she wept. Years passed. The photos kept coming. Lily at her first dance. Lily winning the science fair. Lily getting her driver's license. Posing proudly next to my car. For Elena. They were a monthly ritual of love and pain. For me, they were a monthly reminder of the sentence I had imposed. The final act of our story took place on a bright, sunny afternoon in June. I sat in the audience at Lily's high school graduation, my heart swelling with a pride so immense it felt like it would burst. She was the valedictorian. As she stood at the podium, delivering a speech filled with hope, intelligence, and a kindness that was all her own, I saw her for the woman she had become: strong, brilliant, and whole. She was my masterpiece. my reason for everything. As the ceremony ended and the graduates tossed their caps into the air in a joyous, chaotic explosion, my eyes scanned the crowd. And then I saw her, standing at the very back, partially hidden by a large oak tree, was a woman in a simple dress, wearing a baseball cap pulled down low and sunglasses that hid most of her face. But I knew it was her. She had broken the rules. She had risked everything for this one moment. To see her daughter graduate with her own eyes. Our gazes met across the crowded lawn. For a long, silent moment, the world seemed to fade away. There was no anger, no hatred. There was just a shared history, a silent acknowledgement of the path we had walked, of the price we had both paid. I could have called security. I could have destroyed her. But I didn't. I just held her gaze for a second longer. And then, I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. A small, silent gesture of, what? Forgiveness. No, not forgiveness. Permission. Permission for her to have this one. Stolen moment of motherhood. She nodded back. A gesture just as small. And then she turned and melted back into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. A ghost, stealing one last look at the life she had left behind. I had my revenge. Damian was in prison. His name, a forgotten footnote. My company was stronger than ever. My daughter was happy and safe. I had won, by every conceivable metric. But standing there, watching my daughter hug her friends, I finally understood the true nature of the victory. I hadn't just defeated them. I had protected my daughter's truth. She would go out into the world believing, with every fiber of her being, that she was the product of a great and unconditional love. And in the end, by making that her reality, I had, in a strange and broken way, made it my own as well. Vengeance can be a cold and empty prize. But in the ruins of my old life, I had built something new. And I had learned that sometimes the greatest expression of power isn't in crushing your enemy, but in a single, silent act of mercy.